April 7, 1945, 12:10 in the afternoon, the East China Sea, 140 miles southwest of Kyushu. Ensign Mitsuru Yoshida stands at the radar console aboard the largest battleship ever built, watching his screen fill with contacts. Hundreds of them. American carrier aircraft, Grumman F-6F Hellcats and Curtiss SB-2C Helldivers are closing fast from the south and east. The ship beneath Yoshida's feet is so massive that even in moderate seas, there is no pitch or roll. Standing at the top of the command tower feels like standing on solid ground. The ship displaces 72,000 tons fully loaded. Her 9 main guns can hurl a 3,200-pound shell over 26 miles. Her belt armor measures 410 millimeters thick. She is, by every measurable standard, the most powerful warship the world has ever seen. What Ensign Yoshida does not know, standing there watching those contacts multiply, is that every single specification that makes this ship extraordinary is about to become irrelevant. Within 2 hours, the largest battleship in history will be at the bottom of the ocean. This is the story of the Yamato, a warship so powerful that her own navy was afraid to use her, a battleship so secret that America did not learn her true size until after the war ended, a weapon so valuable that she spent most of the conflict anchored at port, and when she finally sailed into her last battle, she carried only enough fuel for a one-way trip. The numbers do not add up. And that is precisely the point. Yamato displaced 72,000 tons. The largest American battleship, the Iowa class, displaced 58,000. Yamato's main guns were 460 millimeters in caliber. The Iowas were 406 millimeters. Each of Yamato's 3 main turrets weighed more than an entire 1930s-era destroyer. Her armor could withstand hits from any naval gun in existence. By every metric that mattered to battleship admirals, Yamato was untouchable. Consider the statistics. Japan built 2 of these ships, Yamato and her sister Musashi. Together they consumed more steel, more labor, and more national treasure than almost any other weapons program in Japanese history. Yet Yamato fired her main guns at enemy surface targets exactly once in her entire career. She spent most of 1942 and 1943 anchored at the island base of Truk, burning fuel and feeding 2,700 crew members while contributing nothing to the war effort. Japanese sailors on smaller ships, the ones actually fighting, began calling her Hotel Yamato. The nickname was not a compliment. Before we continue, an important note. This video analyzes Japanese military technology from an educational and historical perspective. We are not celebrating or glorifying war, imperialism, or violence. Our purpose is to understand the engineering, tactical thinking, and human experiences from this period of history. We present facts objectively to learn from history, not to glorify it. Understanding why the most powerful battleship ever built became the most expensive floating hotel in history requires going back to the early 1930s. Japanese naval strategists faced a problem. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 had limited Japan's capital ship fleet to a 3-to-5 ratio against the United States. Japan could build 3 battleships for every 5 the Americans constructed. The math was simple and devastating. Japan could never match America ship for ship. So Japanese planners asked a different question. What if one Japanese ship could defeat 2 or 3 American ships at the same time? The answer was a battleship so large, so heavily armed, and so thickly armored that nothing afloat could stand against it. There was another calculation, too. American battleships had to fit through the Panama Canal. That limited their beam to about 108 feet. A ship that exceeded those dimensions could never be matched by anything America built on its east coast and deployed to the Pacific. Japanese strategists reasoned that a 70,000-ton battleship would be their decisive advantage. The concept was called Kantai Kessen, the decisive battle doctrine. One massive engagement would cripple the American fleet. and ships like Yamato would be the instruments of that victory. Captain Kikuo Fujimoto drew the original designs in 1934, calling for 9 18.1-inch guns on a hull, unlike anything previously attempted. When Fujimoto died unexpectedly in January 1935 from a cerebral hemorrhage, Captain Keiji Fukuda took over the project and guided it through to the final blueprint in March 1937. The design that Fukuda finalized was designated A-140F6. Construction began at Kure Naval Arsenal in Hiroshima on November 4, 1937, under conditions of extreme secrecy. The dry dock had to be deepened by 1 meter just to accommodate the hull. Gantry cranes capable of lifting 350 tons were installed. A massive canopy was erected over the construction site to prevent aerial observation. Windows in nearby buildings were boarded shut. Palm trees were planted along the shipyard perimeter to block any line of sight. Workers signed oaths of secrecy and underwent background checks by military police. Official documents never referred to the ship by name, only as Warship Number 1. The guns presented their own logistical challenge. Each of the 9 460mm barrels was 21 meters long and weighed 147 tons. The turrets were simply too heavy to transport by rail or by sea using existing vessels. Japan had to build an entirely new ship, the Kashino, specifically designed to carry Yamato's turrets to the construction site. Yamato launched on August 8, 1940, and was commissioned on December 16, 1941. 9 days after Pearl Harbor. There was no celebration, no ceremony. Secrecy still came first. The specifications tell a story of engineering taken to its absolute limit. Yamato measured 263 meters in length, with a beam of 38.9 meters. Her 12 Kampon boilers drove 4 steam turbines, producing 150,000 shaft horsepower, pushing her to a top speed of 27.4 knots. Range reached 7,200 nautical miles at 16 knots. The main armament, those 9 Type 94 guns, could fire armor-piercing shells weighing 1,460 kilograms over 42 kilometers. Compare these figures to the American Iowa class. Iowa's 16-inch guns fired shells of 1,225 kilograms to a range of 38.7 kilometers. Yamato outranged her nearest rival by more than 3 kilometers. Her side armor of 410 millimeters was backed by deck armor of 200 millimeters, the thickest combination of any warship ever built. The turret faces carried 650 millimeters of hardened steel. But the secret advantage that Japanese planners prized above all others was size itself. Because Yamato did not need to fit through the Panama Canal, her designers had freedom that American naval architects simply did not. That extra beam meant more internal volume, which meant more armor, more ammunition storage, and a more stable gun platform. Yet none of it mattered. The weapon that was supposed to win a decisive battle never got to fight one. Yamato became Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's flagship in February 1942. Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor and a veteran of the Battle of Tsushima, commanded the combined fleet from Yamato's bridge during the Battle of Midway in June 1942. But Yamato herself stayed 300 miles behind the carrier force, too valuable to risk, too important to lose. This pattern repeated throughout 1943. While Japanese destroyers and cruisers fought desperately around Guadalcanal, Yamato sat at Truk. She lacked the right ammunition for shore bombardment. She consumed too much fuel. Her loss would be a propaganda catastrophe, because the name Yamato was also an ancient poetic name for Japan itself. Sinking the Yamato would be like sinking Japan. So she stayed in port. In December 1943, while ferrying troops from Yokosuka to Truk, the American submarine Skate put a torpedo into Yamato's starboard side. The hit tore open a gash 25 meters long and flooded her rear turret magazine with 3,000 tons of seawater. Yamato limped back to Kure for repairs that lasted until February 1944. She finally fired her main guns at enemy surface targets on October 25, 1944, during the Battle off Samar, part of the larger Battle of Leyte Gulf. Even then, the engagement was brief and confused. Yamato's guns engaged a group of American escort carriers and destroyers known as Taffy 3. Torpedo attacks forced Yamato to turn away, and by the time she could re-engage, Admiral Takeo Kurita ordered the fleet to withdraw, convinced he was facing a far larger American force than he actually was. It was the first and last time Yamato's 18-inch guns spoke against enemy ships. If you are finding this documentary interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Now, let us examine how Yamato's story ended. By April 1945, the Imperial Japanese Navy barely existed. Allied forces invaded Okinawa on April 1st. Emperor Hirohito reportedly asked his military advisors what the Navy was doing to defend the island, saying, "Have we no more ships?" Under this pressure, Admiral Soemu Toyoda ordered Operation 10 Go. Yamato, the light cruiser Yahagi, and 8 destroyers would sail to Okinawa on a suicide mission. The plan called for Yamato to beach herself on Okinawa's shore and use her guns as a coastal fortress until destroyed. Her surviving crew would go ashore and fight as infantry. There was only enough fuel for a one-way trip. When the details were briefed to the captains on April 5th, it provoked the closest thing to a mutiny the Japanese Navy had ever seen. They sailed anyway. On April 6th, the force departed through the Bungo Strait. American submarines. Threadfin and Hackleback tracked them through the night, broadcasting Yamato's position in plain language. The Americans knew exactly where she was. On the morning of April 7th, a token force of 6 Zero fighters appeared overhead. Japanese radio intelligence had revealed that air cover would end at 10 in the morning. After that, Yamato would have no air defense except her own guns, which by 1945 included 162 25mm anti-aircraft weapons. At 12:10 in the afternoon, the first wave struck. Nearly 300 American aircraft attacked in coordinated waves. Dive bombers and fighters strafed the decks to draw anti-aircraft fire, while torpedo bombers concentrated their attacks on Yamato's port side, a tactic learned from the sinking of her sister Musashi 6 months earlier. By 1:40 in the afternoon, Yamato was listing 15 to 18 degrees to port. Counterflooding reduced this to 10 degrees, but her main battery could no longer fire. Her speed dropped to 18 knots. At 2:02, Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito ordered the mission cancelled and the crew to abandon ship. He then retired to his cabin. Captain Kosaku Aruga tied himself to the binnacle. At 2:20, Yamato capsized completely. 3 minutes later, her forward magazines detonated. The explosion sent a mushroom-shaped cloud 6,000 meters into the sky. It was seen and heard in Kagoshima, 200 kilometers away. Of her crew of approximately 3,300 men, only 276 survived. The Americans lost 10 aircraft and 12 men. Yamato now rests in 2 main pieces in roughly 300 meters of water. Her bow section sits upright, and the 2-meter-wide imperial chrysanthemum crest on her prow still carries a faint golden color. Underwater surveys in 1985 and 1999 confirmed the wreck site, and a 9-minute video of the survey plays today at the Yamato Museum in Kure, the same city where she was built in secret more than 80 years ago. Ensign Yoshida survived the sinking. He later wrote a book about his experience, one of the few first-hand accounts of what it was like aboard the most powerful warship ever built in the final hours of her existence. The ship that was supposed to win a decisive battle never fought one. The weapon designed to sink enemy battleships was herself sunk by aircraft launched from carriers 200 miles away. The largest guns ever put to sea fired at an enemy surface target exactly once. Yamato was not defeated by a bigger ship. She was defeated by a change in the nature of war itself. Sometimes the most powerful